everybody. Welcome to our first podcast at Away Home Washington. We have an exciting guest with us here today. We're going to take a moment to introduce them in a second, and they're going to be able to introduce themselves. But I just want to say that this is our first podcast. I have the exciting opportunity of being able to bring it to you all during Pride Month. And so this month, we're going to focus on all these intersections between those who are QT BIPOC or those who are LGBTQ plus in the work that we do at Away Home Washington. We want to bring some awareness. I'm Deontay Cruz. I'm the Strategic Communications Coordinator with Away Home Washington. And joining me today is Liz. Liz, do you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Sure. Thanks, Deontay. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm really excited to dive in today, um, especially seeing as it's Away Home's first podcast. I am Liz Harding Chao, and I use she and they pronouns. And I am the Data and Evaluation Director at Away Home Washington, and I have been at Away Home Washington for about 4 years now.
That is what's up. And Liz, I've known you for a long time. I know that you are a passionate advocate for young people who are LGBTQ plus, and you're a passionate advocate for those who disproportionately experience homelessness. We're talking about Black, Indigenous people of color, QT BIPOC folks. So we're just going to dive into today's conversation. And can you just talk a little bit about how you feel about LGBTQ young people and Washington, about their access to resources in general? Do you see them as being able to proportionately access resources quality wise, and like have the same level of accessibility as their peers in Washington?
Yeah, thanks, Deontay, for that question. And really, I think when we think about services, not just in Washington, but across the country, they are created with kind of like the baseline in mind. So the baseline being the cisgender, heteronormative white person in most cases. So just as a fundamental belief of mine, I don't believe that QT BIPOC young people are really the target consumer of most services in this state, and so by that I would say that no, I don't believe that services here are very accessible for QT BIPOC young people. I do know that though there are organizations that are led by and serving QT BIPOC and LGBTQ and POC folks who do tailor their services to young people. But it really, if you're a young person in rural Washington, are you really going to have access to services that are catered towards your needs? I think generally, I'm not too sure if the answer could be yes.
You bring up a good point about the services being targeted towards young people and who those demographics are. I think one of the ways that we really sort of target resources and understand who we're targeting resources to is through our data. And so, I just want to ask you outright, like, how are we doing in Washington? How do you feel that we're doing with collecting data to be able to visually see that young people who are QT BIPOC and those who are LGBTQ plus are getting resources that they need?
Yeah, so I can talk about it, especially in terms of our anchor communities, because that's probably where I am most familiar. And for the most part, our anchor communities, for most of them, they are widely collecting sexual orientation data for young people who are accessing homeless services. And there is room for improvement in that data collection in a number of different ways. But I do think that service providers in Washington state are probably more ahead of the curve in this regard than in other parts of the country.
Yeah. Well, we have amazing people like you to thank for that. And, people like Vishesh, who, are an amazing part of our team and has helped us really reform data collection here around the state, but also in our anchor community specifically. So, speaking of which, you really introduced us to this concept of disaggregated data and the importance of disaggregated data and collecting that, especially for young people who are LGBTQ plus and QT BIPOC young folks. Can you speak a little bit about what disaggregated data is and why it's so important to be able to collect that?
Yeah, so when we think about disaggregated data, it really is slicing up your data by category. So in data entry, collection, and analysis, one of the unfortunate things is actually that we have to categorize people, and sometimes um, sorry, someone just rang my doorbell. Just one sec.
That's okay.
Okay, let me just settle back in. It's about categorizing people, which is sometimes not actually very empowering for a lot of people, because you might have to select a race or an ethnicity or a sexual orientation that doesn't necessarily resonate with you. But the thing with disaggregated data and why it's so important is that it can illuminate hidden trends that can back up, that can really support what people are saying verbally or qualitatively. So we can use the numbers and the analysis that we get from disaggregated data to really identify specific populations who are furthest away from justice if you do it right.
Mhm.
For example, there are often very different rates of homelessness when you compare different populations. For example, Asian people experience homelessness at less rates than Black and African American people, Latinx or Hispanic people. And also, it's really important for us to be looking across identities, not just at race, not just at ethnicity, but also when you look at sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity together, you begin to see some particular trends there.
Well, I imagine that it's very hard for us to serve people if we don't know who it is that we're serving. So I could definitely see the importance of that. Can you speak a little bit about how you feel we might be able to further improve on our data collection in Washington, and maybe some of the things that we can do to sort of build upon the data once we have it?
One of the things that I've seen in the anchor communities that I think is a really foundational way that they can improve, um, and across the state, actually. I'm not just going to target anchor communities here, but what I do think needs to happen is that collecting sexual orientation data for young people who are accessing homeless services in this state needs to be universal. And when I say that, I mean that it needs to be mandatory, for want of a better term, to get service providers to collect that data. Because for too long, LGBTQ folks and QTBIPOC folks have been invisibilized and marginalized, right? And if we
Mhm.
continue to operate in this universe, in this realm where we don't mandate this data, we continue to invisibilize people in our data. And it's just really unacceptable to me that we continue to do it. So, but that being said, we need to do it in a way that isn't harming people. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, Liz, say that. All right. Liz, you have given us so much of your time. You have said so many powerful, impactful, and insightful things. I think people are going to have a real understanding, sort of the intersection between collecting great data and better serving youth, especially those who are cutie BIPOC and those who are LGBTQ plus. Excuse me. We have about a minute left. Is there anything that you would want to let the audience know in the next 30 seconds that you feel that they should know, especially when it comes to those who are cutie BIPOC and LGBTQ plus?
Yeah, sure. I would say that, it is Pride Month this month, and June 2022. Whoop whoop. So I would just really want people to use whatever resources they have to support LGBTQ and QT BIPOC folks in their community. And if you really want to go above and beyond, you can even donate to our homelessness prevention and diversion fund. We serve a lot of QT BIPOC and LGBTQ young people. We house them through this fund. We all know that LGBTQ and QT BIPOC young people experience homelessness at higher rates. So if you want to house a young person, definitely consider donating to our fund this Pride Month.
All right. Thank you, folks, for joining us for our very first podcast. Thank you, Liz, for joining us. It's been so amazing to have you on the Away Home Washington podcast show. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Deontay.